The second part of stage one, and arguably the most important part, is beginning to develop a good therapeutic relationship. And the more we learn about relationships, the more that we learn that they're the catalyst of healing. That secure attachment does a whole lot about healing trauma. And I want to talk to you about the way that we advocate that process happening. Is most of you build good therapeutic relationships with your clients. Very few of you ever achieve excellence in the development of your relationships with your clients. And good enough is good enough. But what happens with you is that you find those clients whose relationships, that the relational process is flagging behind, and you also notice that those are the ones that therapy becomes increasingly difficult for you. And the better that you are able to attend to the therapeutic relationship, the easier your work is. So I want to talk to you about my relationship with Scott Miller and the evolution of my skills here, and hopefully you'll be able to use some of this towards your own maturation. I started reading Scott Miller. This has been early 90s. No More Bells and Whistles, The Heroic Client. And then in 1999, when The Heart and Soul of Change was published, he was cemented in my consciousness as a saint of this field. There's nobody alive, with the possible exception of his partner Barry Duncan, that has done more for understanding what it is and how to implement excellence in the field of psychotherapy than Scott Miller. And for those of you that have ever seen him do a presentation, I want to strongly advocate that sometime in your professional career, you see Scott, you find where he's doing a keynote, or you go to one of his trainings, and watch him do his 2-hour presentation. And he takes his shoes off, he paces nonstop back in front of the room. He's got really cool PowerPoints, and he cusses like a sailor. And at the end of those 2 hours, your jaw's hanging open. I've done 2 keynotes with Scott. And the first time was in 2008 in Tucson, and it was the Southwestern Behavioral Therapy Conference. And I did my shtick from 8 until 9:45 that morning, and then he came on at 10 and did his thing. And even having already read all this stuff, I was blown away. And then they sat us at the same table. 600 folks at the conference, and big room, and we're having lunch. And they set us up on a raised stage, all the presenters, and I was seated right beside Scott. And I remember, I felt like Wayne in Wayne's World. I was like, oh, I'm not worthy, because he's a rock star, and I'm not. And I remember eating my salad, and him sitting beside me, and being so afraid that I couldn't even turn to him. And finally, I said, enough. And I turned and I said, hi, Scott, I'm Eric. And he said, oh yeah, I caught some of your presentation. It was great. And we talked, and we built a little bit of a connection. Enough that 2 weeks later or so, I went back home to Sarasota, where I was living, and I called him up at the University of Chicago, expecting I'd get his administrative assistant, and I got him, and Scott, and I went, and finally I got the words out, and I said, Scott, hi, this is Eric. I'm wondering if you would be willing to allow me to use your materials in my training with folks, helping them to be better therapists with trauma. And without missing a beat, listen to what he said. He said, sure, Eric, as soon as you get it. Now, I've got a little bit of a swagger clinically. I got a little bit of this. And he just went, whew, and And in one of the rare instances of grace in my life, I didn't get tweaked. I just said, okay, Scott, teach me what I'm missing. And what ensued was a 40-minute conversation that has changed my practice forever. And I already understood. I had taught classes in therapeutic relationship. I understood how important it was. But up until that conversation with Scott, I was a one-trick pony. I had only a hammer, and all of my clients were nails. And the hammer that I had was Carl Rogers' core characteristics. And so if I wanted to improve a therapeutic relationship with you, what would I do? I would just be more warm, more compassionate, more transparent, and I would become a golden retriever sitting across from you. I mean, that was all I knew to do, was to just more strenuously apply these core characteristics of change that Carl Rogers, 50 years ago had brought forward. And what Scott would help me to see in that conversation was it's not a one-size-fits-all. He said, Eric, what we do instead is that we collect data from our clients. And we collect data to find out what is working, and we collect data to find out, more importantly, what isn't working. And we do more of what is working and less of what isn't working. And I was like, duh, yeah, of course we do. Why is it taking us 100 years to figure this out? Of course we do. And what happened as soon as I hung up that call, being emboldened by, talking with the king, was I began to immediately practice feedback-informed therapy with all my clients. That day, I signed up on his website and got the session rating scale and the outcome rating scale, and I began immediately doing feedback-informed therapy. And I did it with every single one of my clients. I started that day saying, I learned this really important thing at a workshop, and it really will help us, and I'm wondering if you'd be willing to try it. And all my clients said, sure. And I did it with every single one of my clients for a month. And then the second month came, and I was like, I don't really need to do it every session, do I? No, we can start doing this every other session, every third session. And within 90 days, I was doing feedback-informed therapy with none of my clients. A year later, I got invited to do a different conference that Scott was also at. I didn't know that was going to happen, but he was there. And I did my thing, and then later on that day, I sat through his presentation. And while I was sitting through his presentation, almost the exact same stuff for the year before, I started getting sick. I almost threw up. I started having sweats. I was shaking. I had a physiological crisis of integrity because I realized in that moment I had stopped doing what was right for my clients because of how uncomfortable it made me. And I did not like myself in that moment. I was 48 years old. I went back home to Sarasota and I immediately hired a supervisor. And I spent the next 18 months and about $5,000 in supervision. I could not do this on my own. I couldn't do feedback-informed therapy as a lone wolf. I needed help. I needed accountability. I needed somebody to hold my feet to the fire, and I needed to talk through the crux places in this. Now, what I want to do with you during this course is I want to introduce you to feedback-informed therapy. I'll give you enough information that you can get started on it. But for you to develop any kind of excellence with it, what you're going to need to do is at least find peer groups that are doing this that you can share, if not getting yourself into supervision. It's just really hard to do all by yourself on your own. So the first thing I want to share with you is that if you look at, you've probably read the slide already, it's been up there for a little while, is that in 2013 this became an evidence-based treatment. SAMHSA has listed it officially as an evidence-based treatment. And it is, depending on how you read research, this is the most effective treatment on the planet. And I just love it. Doesn't matter whatever treatment method you want to use. It doesn't matter. It matters whether or not you are continually evolving and growing and enhancing the therapeutic relationship through a feedback-informed process. I love that. That's cool. And that's what we're going to advocate that you do, is develop this capacity for, and here's the real rub. The real rub, the simple explanation of what feedback-informed therapy is, it is eliciting from your clients negative feedback. It is asking them to share with you what you can change, how this process with you can change to make it better. And that's daunting for a lot of clinicians. So while I have this information in your manual, what I'm going to ask you to do is to not print this information out. What I'm going to ask you to do instead is, you see on that slide is Scott Miller's website. It's www.scottdmiller.com. And when you go to his website, about every 2 weeks, he has a different blog on the splash page on that website. And it's really good material. It's always applied research of how to take this information and understand the science part of our field and how that gets applied sitting across from a clinician. It's really informative for those of us that sit across from clients. And there's, depending on how your browser configures it, either across the top or down the side, there is a set of menu options. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to click on the menu option that says FIT licensing, feedback-informed therapy license. And that'll take you to a page, and it says add to cart is a little box down there, and when you click that, it will download a page of legalese. And if you'll fill out that page and agree to not use it nefariously, to not change it, to not distribute it except to your clients, and not sell it, then Scott will license you for the rest of your career to use feedback-informed therapy for free. Another reason why I believe he should be canonized. He charges agencies, but for individual practitioners, he makes that material available for free. And when you sign that sheet and you put your email in that and you push submit, what immediately happens is you get an email back from the ICCE, which is the International Center for Clinical Excellence, that has the SRS, 3 versions of the SRS, which is the session rating scale, a child, adolescent, and an adult version, and 3 versions, same versions of the ORS, which is child, adolescent, and adult version of the outcome rating scale, translated, and I think that he has that in 20 different languages now. And you are licensed now to use feedback-informed therapy for the rest of your career. So, what is feedback-informed therapy? Well, here it is, 3 simple steps. And I don't know if you read it in that previous slide or not, but this is how you double your outcomes. There's nothing else you can start tomorrow and get doubled outcomes except feedback-informed therapy. So this is how you maximize your effectiveness. This is how you take whatever you're doing and turn it into excellence. And Scott, this is really cool research that he did. He went looking for excellence and how to achieve excellence. And he did a lot of qualitative research. He interviewed a whole lot of people who were at the top of their game in athletics and business and industry and chefs and chess players. I mean, just people that were really, really good at what they did, top 5%. And he found consistently that there is one primary enemy of excellence in everything. And the enemy of excellence is automaticity. The more you do something by rote, the more on autopilot that you are while you are doing an activity, the less chances you have of achieving excellence and sustaining excellence in that task. People who are able to achieve and maintain excellence are constantly evolving, constantly changing, constantly seeking negative feedback and factoring that negative feedback to grow and change and evolve. That's bad news for psychotherapists because a lot of us have kind of unconsciously the lust for automaticity. We want to get our process so structured that we can kind of have our clients come in and it's such a regimented process that we don't even have to show up, that we can just kind of let it run on autopilot. And the problem with that is that, yeah, it makes things a little bit more comfortable for us, but it means that what's going to happen is that not only are we going to not have good outcomes, it means that our outcomes are going to dissipate more and more and more. They're going to drift downward over time. And the problem with that is, last thing I'll say about this, and then we'll get into skills building, is that, Scott kind of has you at all corners. When you watch him present, he says, the problem is that we get 70% effectiveness just from our clients showing up. And so what happens is we get parallax around that. We see the 70% we get just from our clients showing up in our office and believe that we're the only ones getting 70%. And so we start believing as clinicians we're better than everybody else, so that we don't really need to work at this. Everybody else needs to work at this, but we're seeing that we're getting, 75% is what you get. And the argument he makes is that we've had 70% effectiveness since 1952. And we've written tens of thousands of books about how to do this stuff. We ought to be getting a little better at it instead of it being the same after 70 years. And to get better, it requires a deliberate practice. And there's a wonderful article that Scott participated on. A whole bunch of the big dogs in the field of outcome research participated in this article. It's 2015. It was called Psychotherapy Outcomes Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow. And they really, even involving this process a little bit, one of the things that they said that is the most potent ingredient in treatment, while it's still relational, it is the deliberate practice, the deliberate and intentional maturation of the clinician is how you have maximal outcomes. So how do you mature as a clinician? Well, a really good start on that is feedback-informed therapy. So I want to share with you how I do it. I want to strongly urge you to get some training from Scott, that's online or live. Avail yourself to those resources. He's got 6 training manuals written about this stuff. So use those resources. Reach out. This will get you started, and you'll see from starting it how much help you're going to need. So what I do is in my office, I have hanging a clipboard that I have 15 or 20 or so of these instruments, blank ones, session rating scale. And that's in your manual. I'm not quite sure what page, but it's also an active link under this on the training, so you can download that as well, and so you can follow along with me. That I have this on clipboard, blank copies of it, and the very last thing I do after the first session, my clients have already paid, they're scheduled for the next session. I say, oh, before you leave, would you please complete this this survey? And have your clients ever had an experience with anything like this before? Yeah, if they've been to McDonald's, they have. If they've bought a car, they have. This is not a head shrinking tool. This is a customer satisfaction survey, and that's the way that I present it to them. This is just about your experience here today and what happened for you. And so I give them the pen, I give them the clipboard, and here's what they do. They go. And then when they get done, they do this. Because they realize as soon as they're done, they've just evaluated you. And now they're anxious about what you're going to do with it. So I just kind of take it away from them. I take it out of their hands gently. I don't yank it out of their hands. And I put it under my arm, and I shake their hand, and I say, thank you very much. I'll see you next week. Don't do any processing with them at the end of the session. And I'll send them on their way. And then I take a couple of minutes, and I score this out. And if you have a penchant towards the OCD end of the spectrum, You can print this out on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and you can use a magnifying glass and a metric ruler, and that line there is exactly 100 millimeters long. So you can set that metric ruler on there, and you can find with the magnifying glass, and you can get that first line is 96.7. Or you can do what I do now, and that's guesstimate to the nearest 5. So I would put that at 95. And I would put the second one at 85, and I'd put the third one at 95 and the fourth one at 95, and write that in there, write that over on the right-hand margin, and then put that in their file. And I'm done. And then when they come back next session, second session, we spend, a minute doing that segue of talking about the weather or the traffic or whatever it is that we talk about. And then I pull this out and I say, remember doing this last week? I wonder if you would be willing for us to spend the first 5 minutes of our time together every session to process what worked and what didn't work in last week's session towards making things a little bit better for you today's session. And the reason why I want to do that is that the good research in our field shows us that when we do that consistently, the benefits for you is that you get your treatment goals met a whole lot more quickly. You're a lot more satisfied with treatment. It is less painful, and you spend less money. Would you be willing to do this? And my clients, most of them say, yeah, okay. Some of them are ambivalent. Yeah, I don't know. And I say, well, can we at least try it? And then if you don't like it, we can stop it. Yeah, fine, okay. So now I have done part 1. I have collected the empirical data. Quantitative data. Now where I'm headed is to generate qualitative data. So now I got to get them talking and be as honest as they can about this. And this is challenging. This is the hard part. This was why I stopped doing it. And it takes some creativity, it takes self-regulation, it takes some flexibility, and it takes some experience. It's hard. It's scary. So here's how I do it, is I say, I want to start with open-ended questions, open world questions. I'm going to move to very closed-end questions, but I start open-ended. And what I do is I kind of look at their SRS for a second, and I then hand it to them. And I say, so, what about last week's session? And 20% of my clients go, oh, it was cool. I've thought about it. I've talked to my wife. I have some questions for you. And they talk. And I listen to them. Ultimately, I'm going to direct those questions to more pointed. But if they have stuff that they want to share, I'm going to listen to them. The other 80% of my clients go, yeah, I don't know. They just give minimal responses because they're afraid. That's appropriate response based upon my client's history. But for me, when I first started doing this, I got irritated and angry and frustrated that they weren't coming forward and sharing all this stuff with me. Today, much less so. And so when I say, so what about last week's session? And they go, what do? Warm countenance and nod. And then I move it to the next question. And if you notice on the slide, 2 things about this. When I first started doing the SRS, I'm a man. I don't read directions. I just started doing it. And what I thought I was supposed to do was cover all 4 of the items. And what was happening with me when I first started doing this in 2008 was I was 20 or 25 minutes into the session talking about the SRS. And I got increasingly self-conscious about that, and it was a perfect justification of why I couldn't do it with my clients anymore, because it was taking too much of our time with my agenda. So it was a perfect reason of why I let it go. And then in 2009, when I had my crisis, I thought maybe I ought to start reading some stuff about this. And I got Scott's manuals, and I was like, oh, I'm only supposed to work with 1 item. And which item would you guess is the one that I'm supposed to be working with? The low score one. Whichever they score lowest. And the other thing I'll say is your clients are afraid of you. which means they're going to inflate, most of your clients are going to inflate their scores early on in this process. So you're going to get all of those items constellated over on the right-hand side. Unless you really screwed up the first session, or unless you're working with somebody with a significant personality disorder, you're going to have really good scores the first time you do this, because they are afraid of your confrontation. They're afraid of you getting angry with them or hurting them. So I use that, and I say, you know, I'm looking at those scores, and it seems like that we had a pretty good session last week. Statement framed as a question. And 10% of my clients go, yeah, it was cool, I thought about it, and they talk, and I'll listen to them. The other 90%, what do they say? Minimal responses, to which I respond by no coercion, just warm countenance and nod. And then I take it a little bit deeper. And I say, yeah, the scores look pretty good on that, but I noticed on that second one, under goals and topics, you scored that one a little bit lower than you did all the other ones. Listen to my pronouns here. I wonder if you can think back to last week's session. What did I do or not do during that session that caused you to score that one a little bit lower? And more importantly, what can we do in today's session to make that a little bit more satisfying for you, to move that up a tick or two? Did you notice my pronouns? I used I for the past. I am responsible for all the mistakes of the past. So what did I do or not do in last week's session that caused you to score that one a little bit lower? And what we're doing with the SRS and with feedback informed therapy is we're building a collaborative relationship. So building that collaborative relationship, I want to do that with my pronouns too. What can we do in today's session to move that up a tick or two, to make this a little bit more satisfying for you? To which, how do you suppose that my clients respond to that? They all say the same damn thing. And what is it that they say? Same syllables, is not even words. And this was what demoralized me. I didn't know where to go from there. It just was like, it just filleted me. I mean, I just was like, I couldn't move. And I stopped doing it. And then in supervision, what I did was work through and try out a bunch of different things, and most of them were failures. But I finally stumbled on some stuff that works pretty nicely. And here's what I do, is when I give, I don't know, is I look at them and I nod. And then I go into reverie and I go, you know what? I'm a good therapist. But I'm not a good therapist with you yet. I want to be. But for me to be a good therapist with you, I need for you to teach me. I got the therapy stuff. I know how to do that. But what we've learned in the past 10 years in this field is it doesn't matter that I know how to do all the therapy stuff. What matters is that I am able to deliver it to you in a way that fits and works for you. So I need for you to, for us to be effective, I need for you to teach me what you like and what you don't like, what works and what doesn't work. And if you'll teach me those things, I'll go to school and I'll get good at this with and for you, I promise you. But I can't do it by myself. I need your help. So let me ask you again. I did something or didn't do something in last week's session that caused you to score that one a little bit lower. Would you please help me discover what it is that I did that caused you to not have a perfect experience in last week's session, that we can change in today's session, and to make that just a little bit better for you? Would you please help me with that? Can you feel that? So that was a little bit different than the first time I asked, wasn't it? And my clients, wanting to be helpful And you see what I'm doing is I'm leading with what Brene Brown talks about as being the kind of, component of spiritual maturation, which is vulnerability. I'm being vulnerable with my clients. I'm asking them for help. And they want to help. But for them to help, it means they got to confront their therapist. So they end up in this state of dissonance, and you see them kind of squirming in their chair and going, ah, 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 ah. And what I hear mostly is something like this. And as I said, that's the one I usually get the lowest. And they usually say something like, well, Eric, buddy, you're pretty intense. And last week I was talking about something, I don't remember what it was. I think I was talking about my mom. And you jumped in and you cut me off. And then you kept going on and on and on and talking about something that didn't make any sense at all to me. And then the only way I could get you back on track was I had to interrupt you. What's my response to that? There's only one appropriate one. And my appropriate response is a felt sense, real, genuine, thank you. I really appreciate you letting me know that. And you know what I'm going to do today is I'm going to see if I can dial down my intensity. Be a little less intense, a little bit more chill. And see if I can police myself around not cutting you off, not chopping you. But here's what I'm going to ask you to do. At any time during today, you feel me starting to get too intense with you, you start to experience me cutting you off, or anything else that is not Goldilocks and what's Goldilocks all about? That's right, just right. Anything that's too hot or too cold or too hard or too soft, anything at all that's not just right, would you, beep, Eric, can you change this? Can you do this a little differently? Can you ask it this way? Would you be willing to help me with that? I would sincerely appreciate that. Would you be willing? And what dynamics do we have in our session right now? I am no longer doing therapy to my client. I'm now doing therapy with my client. We have de facto produced a collaborative relationship in that process. Now, the uncomfortable parts of, if that wasn't uncomfortable enough, the other parts of this is that guess what happens to those scores over time? They go down. Why do the scores go down? Downward moving scores on the SRS in early treatment is evidence that you have built a safe place for your client. It is them no longer being afraid of you. It is them coming forward with their agenda, with what they're wanting from treatment, and asking for it and asserting themselves. And for a lot of your clients, that's the first time in their life they've ever done that. And that's a miracle. We just got to tolerate the narcissistic injury to get it. Get the clients we want as we take the hit. The other thing about the SRS is dedicating yourself to using it, which I think every person who ever works with trauma, I think the feedback-informed therapy is the soul of trauma-informed care. Dedication to using that, what that means is every single session for the rest of your career gets to start with a narcissistic injury. You get to hear how you failed in the last session. And that never stops stinging. That always comes with a little, I missed it. But the cool thing about that, when I am having my bad days and all I want that day is a glide path to 4 o'clock, is automaticity. I am fully on board with automaticity that day, and I want to just nod and listen to my clients. The cool thing about doing the SRS, feedback-informed therapy, at the beginning of the session, is when I confront myself with myself and I listen to where I missed it, what happens is I emerge from the 5 minutes with my sleeves rolled up, and I'm now in it to win it. I am fully engaged, and it consistently caused me to become a better therapist than I would be if I were left to my own autopilot devices. I don't like doing feedback-informed therapy. I'd rather not. But I like myself as a therapist a whole lot better using feedback-informed therapy. My integrity stays intact. And the last thing I'll say about this is I told you guys that I've done a whole lot of psychotherapy on myself for years, 25 years, off and on, as both training and treatment. And this has been one of the most potent skills building, evolving fulcrums in my relational skills of anything, is that this has made me a better partner, better citizen, better friend, because what it's made me is a whole lot less reactive to other people's criticism. Is that I've gotten all kinds of benefits from doing feedback-informed therapy with my clients. I've received all kinds of benefits in my personal life as a result of doing that. It has made me more thick-skinned and simultaneously not thick-skinned and hard, but thick-skinned and connected. And to be able to do both of those two things simultaneously. And that's pretty cool, because I didn't have a vision for that before I started doing the SRS. I didn't know how to do that. And this has taught me how to be able to hold on to myself when I'm being criticized, but also continue to stay connected with people I love, instead of having to get reactive with them. And this has been good practice and progress towards that. Scott advocates the use of the ORS, which is the outcome rating scale, and doing that regularly as well. What we're going to do is I'm going to show you instead of using the ORS, you're certainly welcome to, and I'm not poo-pooing that. I'm saying that it's a great instrument and it's a wonderful tool to do, and you can download that and check it out. What we're going to do is when we get into the assessment process, I'm going to show you a trauma-specific outcome measure that you can use in place of the ORS. Okay, we're going to move on now to stage 2.